This Bus Demi e-Learning Academy video is about leadership practices in today's organizations. Leadership is a science that approaches changes in organizations, changes in theories, and the special contributors to different leadership reactions, styles, and organizations' responses. The video presentation researched Dubrin's book Leadership, Research Findings, Practice, and Skills, Kanungo and Mendoka's book Ethical Dimensions of Leadership, Aronson's article, Integrating Leadership Styles and Ethical Perspectives, the article An Improved Measure of Ethical Leadership from Ucal, Masud, Hassan, 2011. And few other sources have described leadership theories. This overview is based on leadership theory and research. The subsequent slides will explain themes and theories of leadership. Especially important is that the research have had real applications in the past and today USA companies, corporations, and other civil organizations. The examination of leadership as a group and organizational phenomenon has been the focus of both theoretical and empirical analysis for more than half a century of research about management and leadership. As Bennis, 1959, wrote, of all the hazy and confounding areas in social psychology, leadership theory undoubtedly contends for top nomination. In addition, ironically, more has been written and less known about leadership than about any other topic in the behavioral sciences. Always, the concept of leadership eludes us or turns up in other forms to taunt us again with its slipperiness and complexity. Defining good leadership style became more difficult as changes in organizations, demographics, technology, and diversity brought more variables to leadership scenarios. The meaning of leadership. According to Dubrin, 2001, page 3, leadership is the ability to inspire confidence and support among the people who are needed to achieve organizational goals. Some definitions are, interpersonal influence direct through communication toward goal attainment, an influential increment over and above mechanical compliance with directions and orders. Cotter, 1996, said, managers must know how to lead as well as how to manage. Without being led as well as managed, organizations face the threat of extinction. Scholars and practitioners may sometimes disagree that managers need leadership training, building that leadership on the basic functions of management. This information of leadership captures the essentials of being able and prepared to inspire others. Effective leadership is based upon ideas, both original and borrowed, that are effectively communicated to others in a way that engages them enough to act as the leader wants them to act. A leader inspires others to act while simultaneously directing the way that they act. They must be personable enough for others to follow their orders, and they must have the critical thinking skills to know the best way to use the resources at an organization's disposal. In summary, leadership is a person that inspire people, empower people, shared a vision and lead to change. The following slides will explain the 4 topics about what is leadership. Leadership. How this works. What the research says support this question. How do leaders inspire employees? The leader's behavior must inspire employees to act in the same way. Communication, integrity, inclusion, and sensitivity to the needs of the employees round out the qualities and characteristics of an inspirational leader. No one is inspired by a leader who people think does not care about them. Defining leadership empowerment. What is it? Empowerment is a means to include the team in decision-making, to give them a participatory role which capitalizes on their own expertise and judgment, and that increases their sense of both individual worth and commitment to the organization. How do leaders create a shared vision? Creating a shared vision requires that leaders build a strong foundation and framework. They must provide both real and perceived stability without coming across as too regimented, scripted, or prescriptive. It also requires them to value the cultivation and sharing of new ideas. Led change. This is a must. Change leaders must lead the change by setting an example. They should create a collaborative culture within the organization so that people can step up in case of emergencies. They should also collect regular feedback to improve the leadership approach and change techniques for future initiatives. In Shine, E.H., 1996, book Leadership and Organizational Culture, said, Defining good leadership style became more difficult as changes in organizations, demographics, technology, and diversity brought more variables to leadership scenarios. However, in a different perspective, Schein, 1996, leaders have been studied throughout history, and social psychology has from the outset made leadership a focus of research. One of the most consistent findings by historians, sociologists, and empirical-oriented social psychologists is that what leadership should be depends on the situation, the task to be performed, and the characteristics of the leader's subordinates. One reason for the many different theories of leadership is that different researchers have focused on different elements. At one level all these theories are similar, because they all identify one central component of the complex human situation. However, at another level many theories lack a concern with organizational dynamics. Organizations have different needs and problems in their evolution. Schein, 1996. What is ethical dimensions of leadership? Business ethics aims to include ethical standards in the business strategy, thus ensuring long-lasting development and system sustainability. The need to integrate the ethical dimension into business is determined by the current economic, financial, and social limitations. Ethical Dimensions of Leadership was written by Kanungo, R.N., and Mendoka, M., 1996. They said that leadership scholars approach research in diverse ways to satisfy their academic needs. Depending on that they face considerable obstacles at both the conceptual and empirical levels of study. At the conceptual level, developing integrative and compressive frameworks to understand the leadership phenomenon is difficult. At the empirical level, the ambiguity of research findings has led some to question the usefulness of research endeavors in the leadership area. Kanungo and Mendoka, 1996. The influence that leaders have on followers or employees is powerful. This influence can transform an organization into an excellent place to work or can be a source of employee dissatisfaction. Leading change. Leaders must lead the change by setting an example. They should create a collaborative culture within the organization so that people can step up. According to Cotter, 1996, without good leadership, organizations have the tendency to disappear. If they do not disappear, they at least lose business and revenues, creating turmoil inside the corporation. Bennis and Goldsmith, 1997, wrote that given the nature of constancy, change, and the challenges that organizations face, the key to making the right choices will come from understanding and embodying the leadership qualities. Bennis and Goldsmith's theory is like those of other scholars in that surviving in an increasingly volatile and mercurial environment requires leaders, not managers. Theories and dimensions of leadership. The leadership phenomenon can be approached from the point of view of the leader's behaviors. What behaviors are typical of effective leaders? Why do leaders perform these behaviors? What leaders' behaviors help employees to grow as members in the company? Answers to these questions provide information on leadership role behaviors and the motives that initiate, direct, and energize these behaviors. Kanungo and Mendoka, 1996, page 52. These approaches to leadership behaviors focus on the leadership phenomenon as a leader-centered construct. They emphasize the leader's motivational dispositions that trigger and sustain leadership role behaviors. Additionally, these approaches study how the leader's behaviors are designed to influence the followers' values, attitudes, and norms. Leaders have the power to influence followers and thus need to have an exemplary attitude toward society so followers will emulate these attitudes and behaviors. The influence that leaders have on followers or employees is powerful. This influence can transform an organization into an excellent place to work or can be a source of employee dissatisfaction. Leadership across hierarchical levels. What is a hierarchical level? Is a structure made up of different levels like a company organization chart. The higher levels have control or precedence over the lower levels. Moreover, the psychological mechanics and dynamics that affect the beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors of both the followers and leaders is characterized by organizations' leadership and followers scenarios. The representation is a linking process among various organizational members at different hierarchical levels. Likert, 1961. The close leadership between a focal leader and her immediate followers has been the subject of extensive research in various settings. Mostly larger organizations provide the right environments to conduct extensive research of the topic. This researcher understanding is the distant leadership between a focal leader and her followers not reporting directly to him. Her is much more limited. Antonakis and Atwater, 2002. Avolio, Zhu, Co., and Bottis, 2004. Waldman and Yamarino, 1999, and suggests several gaps in the leadership literature. Continuing with leadership across hierarchical levels. The research and theory explain the topics as follow. Leadership scholars have tended to presume that organizational leadership at upper echelons represents distant leader-follower relationships. However, a leader's hierarchical level does not necessarily indicate the leader-follower distance, as evidenced by chief executive officers and their top management teams. Shamir, 1995. Depending on the types of organizational leadership, the CEO and executive skills must be to remove communications gaps that exists between upper management and followers. The extant literature on charismatic leadership has been criticized for focusing primarily on leaders' personal characteristics and thus failing to recognize leadership based on a social relationship between the leader and follower. Chun J.U., Yamarino, F.J., Dion S.D., Sosik J.J., Moon H.K., 2009. Leadership is by nature a multiple-level phenomenon occurring between an individual leader and individual followers, groups of followers, and/or collectives of the groups of followers. Dancero and Yamarino, 1998. The followers' expectations are based on the leader's ability to establish an open communication with the followers and groups of employees that belong to the organization. Preparing for ethical leadership. Why we need it. Because the true and effective leadership is that in which the leader's behavior and the exercise of the leadership influence process are consistent with ethical and moral values. An organization's ability to inspire its staff to meet high standards of quality and service also depends on the degree to which the organization is committed to positive business ethics. Unlike compliance, which focuses on specific behavior required by law or regulation, ethical behavior is a commitment to moral correctness and honesty. The Roman orator Cicero, as cited in Gustafson, 2001, defined ethical behavior as that which a person ought to do. Ethical behavior in business is the assumption that is an indisputable right way to act in every situation. Gustafson. People, and especially leaders in organizations, have the responsibility to have morals and comply with them. Thousands of years have passed since the days of Cicero. Society has changed in many ways. However, the fundaments of ethics remain the same. Presently, higher populations, technological changes, industrialized nations, fashions, and many more changes have affected the morality of portions of the population. Expanding the theory confirms that organizations practicing ethical leadership can promote employee engagement, increase productivity, and enhance brand reputation. Organizations that engage in ethical behavior can attract customer loyalty by staying true to their mission statements and organizational values. Past research says that industrialized nations have an infrastructure of large numbers of organizations, which overwhelming do not exercise ethical behaviors. Ethics are not always present in business environments. Aronson's 2001 article, Integrating Leadership Styles and Ethical Perspectives, elaborated that corporate social responsibility is a function of two major elements: profits and ethics. When the value system of a corporation explicitly acknowledges the importance of human values by granting parity with the values of profit and technology, then economic responsibilities will be balanced with moral responsibilities. Clarkson, 1991, as cited in Aronson, 2001. The importance of ethical leadership. What is that? The importance of the ethical changes is that focus on the employee's view as human beings, within the theory that employee satisfaction can eventually bring better revenues. Revenues are the primary part of the capitalist system. Capitalism may be considered the economic basis for prosperity in democratic countries, but it is subject to criticism from an ethical perspective. The issue for capitalists is to be aware that although inefficient firms will be mercilessly eliminated due to free market forces, the moral sentiments of man will only gradually and uncertainly penalize immoral ones. Wilson, 1995, as cited in Aronson, 2001. Ethical behavior on the part of the leader seems to be the necessary condition for the establishment of an ethical organization, but this alone is not sufficient. Ethical leadership is required. Leaders and CEOs are obliged to set a moral example for organizational members and to separate the constant striving for increased profits from those activities, which may be detrimental to the values of society in general. Leadership behavior is the sense of leading others. It is more than the routine maintenance activities of allocating resources, monitoring and directing followers, and building the organization's esprit de corps. True leadership assesses the followers' needs and expectations and inspires them to realize a vision that best serves the followers and the organization. Mendonca, 2006. The leader needs to give examples of moral principles and integrity that give legitimacy and credibility to the vision and sustain it. When the leader's moral integrity is in doubt, the leader's vision is, too. Leadership refers to a set of roles, behaviors, or actions on the part of a person who assumes the leadership role in an organization either by a formal appointment or by the informal choice of organizational members. Conceptualizing and measuring ethical leadership. The empirical study of leadership has overlooked the ethical dimensions of leadership. The research that has been conducted is limited by lack of specification of an agreement on a constitutive definition of ethical leadership. Researchers have attempted to measure ethical leadership tangentially, through a few items: Bass and Evolio, 1995, Trevino, Weaver, Toffler, and Gibson, 1999. How to measure ethical leadership is a controversy. Brown and Trevino, 2002, described many directions for research to test the relationship between supervisory ethical leadership and employee outcomes. The measure of leadership academically or empirically must start in organizations at the executive levels, and top-down outcomes such as employees. The appropriate way to define and measure ethical leadership has been a source of conceptual confusion in the leadership literature. Late research found that ethical leadership makes a small but significant contribution to the explanation of leader-member exchange and managerial effectiveness. Uckel, Masad, Hassan, 2011. In conclusion, what is leadership effectiveness? Every organization should do its best to enable effective leadership. Organizations, in general, should be open to doing things differently and be cognizant of how their market is evolving and how customers are changing. Good leaders need a good support system in order for them to function well and maximize their potential. Leadership effectiveness, put simply, refers to the leader's ability to influence his or her subordinates. The quest for executive effectiveness and improving leadership has resulted in many theories and strategies to approach leadership. Most of the definitions of leadership today focus on the external manifestations of vision, drive, creativity, and charisma. However, no one leader could excel in all these desired qualities. The video is from Bus Demi e-Learning Academy. The owner of Bus Demi has the expertise of more than 20 years of the project management industry. Bus Demi is a PhD in business management, multinational electronics industry practitioner, and academic university business professor in the USA.